Hello, friends. So happy to have you here with us today at Radical Joy. If you've been here before, welcome back. If this is your first time with us, well, we're glad you're here. Each Wednesday, we're here with you talking about things that weigh on our minds and hearts, hoping if you're dealing with something similar, we can adjust our perspectives as you listen. The more people we meet and the more places we go, the more we realize how important it is to make people aware of the fact that there is no shame in enjoying the parts of your life that are incredible. It's time for some Radical Joy, and this week, the three fingers pointing back at us are for our guest today, Tamar Nugent Gaynor. Tamar is a hospitality professional and mom of two living in central New Jersey. She is Jamaican by birth and Bostonian by circumstance. She is a lifelong lover of crafts and also dabbles in photography and graphic design. She's a proud member of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority, Incorporated, and an international historically black sorority founded 103 years ago on the campus of Howard University. Her dog Gryphon has a first, middle, and last name and is her favorite child.
Yes, he is.
Oh, welcome, Tamar. Oh, my goodness.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here with you today.
I am thrilled that you made the time to be with us today. Thank you for accepting our invitation. Tamar and I have known each other for many years. We worked together in the service industry in New York City in two different restaurants under the same umbrella corporation. And while I was working with Tamar, it was absolutely a joy to get to learn so much more about city life and how much I had yet to learn. And under her very competent guidance and a little bit of mother henning, I actually survived the great big bad asphalt jungle.
A little bit of bullying too.
Hey, I'm a stubborn one. Sometimes it takes a little bit more than just a kindness to get me on the right path. So when we started Radical Joy, Tamar was absolutely one of the first people on my list to bring on board. Number one, she is a driving force for so many. I know that any and all of us that worked with her considered her to be such a wonderful mentor, gentle to a point, and then very direct in others. It's really a tricky proposition to find someone who wants to see you do well and continue to be that motivator, who is also someone who has a very specific idea in mind that is very clearly communicated. And whenever we started doing Radical Joy a year ago, for a long time, it was just me on here. And I was like, hey, can we bring on some guests? And here she is. And I could not be more excited to have her here.
That was so eloquent. Thank you.
Of course.
What a way of putting, that I'm pretty much going to tell you to do what I want you to do.
That's it. And that was it.
Yeah, I mean, we worked in so many situations. We worked together at such a special time.
Yes.
Because I think the last 15, 20 years, so much has changed in just how our society works from day to day, especially in the service industry. And it was just that little, kind of, I don't know if it was the eye of the storm or the actual storm, but so many things changed in how we expected people to interact with us, how people expected us to interact with them, what they expected of us. And it was a whirlwind. And by the time we kind of came out of it, or we're standing where we are today, it's looking back on 15, 20 years ago, it's such a different industry. And it was just the thought of what we do as society and how we think has changed so much. I don't even know how we got through that. How do we make it?
Honestly, because it's one of those things too, where you sit in front of it and you're just like, okay, wow. You look behind you like, we really did all that. There are so many expectations then, so much. The entire landscape.
Smartphones,
Yes.
when we started this, there wasn't. I guess the idea of a smartphone was a little different, and even remember when it was like you can't have your phone out, and and people could go long stretches of chit chatting, and that was a big part of how we got to know each other, was being in the back and chit chatting.
Yeah.
When we're in the service industry and the times that we could chit chat, and we didn't really spend so much time like this with our face in the phone and kind of like getting that dopamine hit from that. And I think the way we interacted with our guests was different because of that.
Yes. Agreed.
Right?
There were a million times whenever I would be in the server station, you drop by with a side eye, like, what's that in your hand? Nothing. Not a thing. It ain't nothing at all. And I'd throw it in a drawer and shut it with the spoons that we could never
Yeah.
find because I had hoarded them all.
But I think people in general were just, I think it was easier for people to put the phone down and say, okay, yeah, let me focus on what I'm doing. Now it's almost it's an odd ask. It's like just generationally, the younger people who are now, at the age we were 15, 20 years ago, it's harder for
Yes.
them to put that phone down and like focus on cutting lemons, or I don't think it's as easy to just kind of like switch your mind back into that analog mode of like, let me focus on the physical task at hand.
Yes.
It's harder. It's almost like, oh, you're interrupting my
Right.
dopamine hit with work. Like, oh, I really
Honestly.
want to watch this reel. Like, let me finish watching this, and then I'll get
Yes.
back to what I'm here to actually, getting paid to do.
100%.
Yeah, and even with the kids, I remember when people would come and plop their kids down with headphones, and we'd be like,
Ugh.
"What are they doing?"
So judgy, right?
Like,
Yeah.
talk to your kid. Ew. Like, the kid's
Yes.
not even ordering for themselves now. It's like it's the norm. Just plop some headphones on a kid, and the kids don't learn how to, interact. And I remember you and I having so many conversations about how it's a life skill to break bread with people, and
Yes.
how these kids weren't learning how to look a server in the eye and say, "Hey, I like pizza. Can you tell me what kind of pizza you have?"
Yes.
And how the expectation for them to do that got less and less until it's pretty much null and void. It's like, "Hey, just watch this cartoon and I'll order for you." And I feel like we watched it in real time.
We
We
did. We
watched
watched
it
the evolution of it, or
it
devolution.
yeah, we watched it decline in real time. We'd be like, "Get crayons, some kids are coming." Now, when's the last time you thought you had a kid ask for
Right.
crayons in a
Oh my gosh.
restaurant?
And it's my question sometimes too, it's just like they can put a finger on an iPad and pick whatever color they want, literally choose it to the hue and tint that they desire.
Yeah,
And you bring up a little, cellophane wrap pack of 3, and they're like, "What the heck is this?" They'll just give you the hairy
yeah.
eyeball, like, "Okay, you fossil." Like, it makes me feel so incredibly old. And also those children that we were looking at 15, 20 years ago at the table and talk about them, after, they're now the adults who are going
Mhm.
out to eat with their own family or with their girlfriend, boyfriend, partner, what have you. And we're seeing what's happening with that. Not judgment, just an observation of
Mhm.
the interaction is very different. It is much more surface. And because of that, I think that the relationship between two people, which is, the party seated and the party that's supposed to be serving, is a very different dynamic than it was whenever we were doing
Yeah.
this.
Mhm. I think the restaurants we worked at had a very big, kind of shtick, and it was to have these fresh baked cookies. Have the
Yes.
managers, we'd walk out with the cookies straight out of the oven, and we'd walk around and offer the hot tray of cookies for someone to pluck a fresh cookie off. And I remember the kids just salivating, like, when are the cookies coming? And then
Right.
I remember the point distinctly where I got to the point where I approached the table with kids, and I'm like, all right, finally, the kids were good, and I'm gonna go straight to them and offer them these cookies. And they were like this. They were like,
Yeah.
and I'm like waving a tray of cookies in their face, and they're just like, they wouldn't even look up.
Right.
It was kind of like, hey, look. And it was like, oh, snatch. Back to, it wasn't like, oh
Right.
my goodness, thank you. It wasn't this like connection of, I noticed that, you said you like chocolate chips. We didn't have any chocolate chip dessert, but we had these cookies. And it was always this connection with these families. And I watched when it was just didn't happen anymore. And it was
Yeah.
so interesting.
Well,
Yeah.
and two, the thing that I remember so much about you guys bringing those trays out was the smell. Like this
Hmm.
incredible aroma would waft throughout the dining room when you came through. And we're talking about a tray of cookies. Now, we're talking about the one that you keep at home underneath the oven in that warmer drawer. We're talking about like that industrial size restaurant use. Giant honker. That thing's almost like 3 feet by 4 feet. It is
Yeah, it's
colossal.
huge. Mhm.
Comes out hot as Hades, so you've got your mittens on to make sure that you don't hurt yourself, and you're walking around, and these things are still, like, gooey. If you didn't
Yeah,
pick it up just right, it would break in half, and you could see the stretch of the chocolate from what
yeah,
was left on the pan and what was in your hand. Oh, and these kids and adults, I don't wanna say it's just the kids, it's
yeah.
absolutely everybody nowadays, and they won't even look up from it. And the thing now that I'm thinking about it as a developing germaphobe, People don't realize how disgusting their phones are because it never leaves your hand. Everything your hand touches, if you don't wash before you touch your phone, it sticks to your phone.
Yeah.
And I don't know if people are sanitizing. I sanitize mine, both the case and the phone, pretty frequently.
Yeah.
And the thought of going from phone to bare hand to cookie to mouth, I'm just like, huh? Oh, that's rough.
Yeah. Yeah, I just don't think, I mean, nowadays, ever since obviously the pandemic, people are 50 times more, aware of cleaning and sanitizing and things like that. But it was such a great touch for so long. And even if, there was plenty of people who would say no, thank you, or for whatever reason, I have an allergy or I'm on a special diet or whatever. There were plenty of people who didn't partake, but I think so many people appreciated the gesture.
Yes.
And then I will say, you're right, it wasn't just the kids. When I got to the point where people just couldn't look up or kind of make that eye contact of like, this is why I love this place. Is when once it was gone, it was like, okay, something's shifting here.
Yeah.
And it really changed the relationship with our guests, because I think for me, what made me so successful in that industry was I have an ability to connect with people, to look them in the eye and make them feel warm. And I think that was a big part of my job and my success, not the actual, crunching of numbers or anything like that. And then I guess on my end, I just kind of felt like I just wasn't getting that engagement back from people. And I still don't fully understand why, but I just know that it has changed. And it
Yeah.
probably is our phones and just the way we interact with each other. But it did make a big difference as the person that people are expecting service from.
Yes.
And then it made a big difference in the kind of interaction and respect I expected back from them.
Yes.
And it was very hard. We would be reeling from the way some of these people would treat us.
Oh my
And I
God.
think that was happening in service industry for decades. That's been happening a long time. But
Sure.
I think the lack of the disconnect. There was just a disconnect of like, hey, I'm feeding you. And I'm trying to make this something fun for you. And you don't always get to come and spend $800 on dinner or pretend with your family. So I'm
Right.
trying to make it special. And it was like, they don't even want it to be special. It was like, I'm just here through the motions, but let's take a picture of the food and let's take a picture like we're having the best time, but we're not actually going to talk to each other and look at each other.
Right. And two, something in sales that I always did, because I sold cars before I went into the service industry.
Mm-hmm.
It was there's something so important about that is rapport. You make that connection, you build that relationship, even if it's just for an hour, hour and a half, however long it takes these people to dine with you. I make that sound like it's a rush or a chore, and it was never like that at either of the places we worked. It was just,
Yeah.
we tried to make an experience because, it was a little bit higher end, and we had a little bit of an expectation on us to make sure that if the food wasn't 112%, which it almost always was, at least the service definitely pushed us way over the top. If you don't make that connection, if you don't build that rapport, if you don't have the opportunity to do that because someone's face is in their phone or in their tablet, that is a unique challenge to a very modern problem.
Yeah, and I think on the restaurant end too, because as in restaurateurs or people who drove those businesses, I remember before I left the city 5-6 years ago, it started to become grab and go. Everybody wanted grab and go. Everybody wanted to walk in, not make eye contact, not have to talk to you. I've already ordered. I can grab this salad in a clamshell packaging and just walk out. And I remember when we were at the restaurant that was down in Union Square, we were down there, that I remember sitting in meeting after meeting with them saying, how can we compete? Like the company that had one of the best reputations for hospitality and warmness and kindness, warmth. I don't know if warmness is a word, but it will be today.
I like
and,
it.
we had this huge reputation for hospitality. And I remember sitting in meetings thinking how we can dumb that down to compete with people who just want to walk in and grab food and not look at you.
Right.
we never figured out how to do it. But
No.
it's very interesting because I think one of the big conversations you and I always had was about being in the service industry and kind of never knowing when people would ill treat you.
Yeah.
You never knew if it was just their idea of your job or you as a person. And you always had, and it was so odd to go to work and have to think of that. Like someone living in a, working in a corporate building, I don't think they have to think about that as much. That like every interaction when someone's doing this and you're kind of like, is it because I'm in this uniform or is it because
Right.
I have these braids or I have this skin color or I have this,
Oh,
like sass in my voice or whatever they may perceive about me. It's such an odd thing to have to think about while you're trying to do your job. But I think that once this kind of grab and go culture happened, it was for a different reason. It was just total lack of interaction. We're like, okay, I guess they don't hate
honestly.
me. They just don't want to talk to anybody.
Right.
Um, but it was, yeah, it was certainly a very interesting time. And I think I had a lot of good conversations, a lot of good thoughts. And it was, incredible to watch, but it really made you kind of think of yourself and how you move through the world when you watch these people and how they treat, people in the service industry for sure.
Agree. And as we continue to insulate ourselves too, because, you're talking grab and go, and that was like, 15, 20 years ago. And now there's
Mhm,
DoorDash, where you don't
mhm.
even have to speak with the service professional. You ordered online. This other middle person goes, picks up the business, brings it to your house, and you never have to get out of your soft pants,
Which is
Just,
was a good thing.
yeah.
But I have to say, I don't like where it's taken society. I
Yeah.
can't speak for society, I can't speak for everybody else, but, what I notice with my Gen Z kids is, I they're my kids, so they're gonna learn social skills for sure.
Amen.
But, my daughter brought up a quote the other day, and she said something like, she said, "Mom, I read this thing that said, my mom is really trying to raise me right, and therefore it's isolating me from my peers." And
Oh,
I thought about that, and I said, what do you take from that?" She's like, "You're always telling me to like look people in the eye and like talk to people and when someone's in line behind us and you're talking to them," and I'm like, "Why are you talking to them?" And I'm like, "'Cause they're a human, like I don't know, just like I
right.
like their sweater." She's like, "You're always pushing me to do that, but like my peers don't do that, and I feel different from them." Because we just don't do that as a generation. There's like a kind of embracing of not having social skills. People are kind of like, why should we? We don't have to, and they're embracing that. And so we had this conversation of how she's kind of like, yeah, you're pushing me to do this, but realize no one else in my generation does this. But I
Right.
feel like, okay, learn the skill, and if you don't use it, you don't use it. But I think it's important to really interact with people, and I think there's this big influx on TikTok for people to kind of like glorify being an introvert and
Yes.
and there's nothing wrong with being an introvert, but I don't
Mm-mm.
think it means that you just get a pass to not have any like social skills.
Agree. Agree, and I think that is that you bring up such an interesting topic. That is so
Yeah.
great because that very much makes a clear delineation between generations of that sort. Because you
Yeah.
and I, oh my gosh, so many people that I'm with, I sent a meme just today. It was like, do you have that friend that feels like he's a local politician, never meets a stranger, da 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 da, and you just stand there like looking at him and wondering, what the heck is going on? You don't join. You're just like, what a weirdo. I can't just stand by. Like, I'm sorry. It's not that I love silence. I can handle quiet and moments of introspection. And also in an age whenever we are so starved for connection, or it's such an unusual or unique moment where we can genuinely share that moment of connection, I am literally in like starvation mode over here.
Yeah.
I am just dying for it. I'm gagging for it. It's like, hey, this person looks like we could share a moment of some kind of something.
It's dopamine. It's the
It
dope. It's
is.
like it's where we used to get it, and now it's being fed to us just on this continuous stream. And I love that feeling. I love
Yes.
connecting. I love telling a woman, I love your earrings, and I just love
Right.
stopping and chatting with people. And my kids all the time are looking at me like, "Do you know her?" And I'm like,
Right.
"No." They're like, "Then why are
Right.
you talking to her?" I'm like, "Because she's
And that
breathing."
exactly. She's perpendicular to the ground, and she looks like she could use
Right.
somebody to tell her she looks nice today.
Right. And it's just
And
I love that feeling of just connecting and just saying, and first of all, I always have something to say, but I just like sharing what I have to say and listening to what other people have to say and like just saying, "Oh, I have the same sneakers." Like I
yes,
don't think there's anything wrong with just saying it to that person. And I just feel like you meet people under a certain age and that's not their experience.
agree.
And I don't really know why, but I am pushing my kids to kind of learn how to do that. I think it's important, but I think that what they're trying to tell me is that it's obsolete.
Well, now that you mention it, and it just kind of pops into my mind, I would not think to reach out to a random stranger on Instagram to tell them that I like their content. That
Yeah.
seems to me just a little bit unusual and somewhat stilted, artificial, wada, wada, wada. Now, younger generations will do that in a heartbeat long before they will a stranger in real life.
Mm.
And I think that may be part of the fun of the whole thing is just understanding, like, why would you talk to that person? I was like, well, why would you reach out to, say, Sammy Jeffcoat on Instagram? Whoop, we love her. She's absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things like maybe she'll find that in her, bajillions of DMs, and maybe she won't. It's that little hit, number one, of reaching out to them and the thrill of doing that. And number two, the chance that maybe she or whatever creator you've reached out to will reply. Even if it's just her people, it's like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And it feels similar, I would think, between the generations. Like if I offer a compliment, it can either be seen as, oh, thank you so much, or thanks, creeper. And they leave the elevator and, give me a hairy eyeball on their way out the door. It's a roll of the dice. It's one of those things like, okay, I hope it's taken well, but if not, I apologize for the awkward moment I've made in your day. It's worth the roll. It's worth the
Yeah.
dice.
I think there's a screen though. The internet creates this screen that you can hide behind
Yes.
where you can, I mean, even in a lot of ways, you have those social justice warriors, you have the keyboard, all the little things they say, the keyboard warrior and the people who like to cause discourse and the people who are, trying to get attention in a positive way. But
Yes.
there is a screen there that you can hide behind. And I think what the younger generation is calling awkwardness is really just that moment before you know someone,
Mhm.
and I think that's an important moment, and it's not bad. You don't have to, they kind of just want to walk into everything already done for them, and I don't want to speak, and this is not a negative, it's my observation. I'm not
I
trying
don't
to
think so.
bash the generation and be a weird, Gen Xer or anything like that, but just my observation of because these are now the new adults,
Yes.
and where we felt the gap between our parents, it's almost like this gap is even bigger in a way.
Yeah.
And I think there's a screen there, and I think what I'm looking for is that look directly in someone's eyes.
Mhm.
That like helps me figure out, is this a creeper? Is this person gonna respond positively to me liking her braids? Or, and I feel like
Yes.
that's where you get that real connection where like the next time you see that person, it's like, oh hey. And
Yeah.
I feel like that's where I get the connection from, but I think that's what other people are afraid of,
Yeah.
that look directly in the eye. And I think on the internet it's easy to say those things, which is good proof that we want, most of us as humans want to say those things. We want to give out good energy. I think it's just that juggling of trying to figure out if the person is receiving it right, or if you should have given it to that person in the first place.
Yes.
Yeah, you get to
And
hide a little bit on the internet.
agree. And there's such a carefully curated persona put forth.
Mhm.
You can be so very specific about exactly what you put into the universe. I was thinking about that this morning. I'm just like, if people were to just look at my content on social media, they would think that I'm some kind of goody two shoes, apple polishing BS master. And part of me, like every once in a while, just likes to throw some swear words out there, like, "Hey, in case you get the idea that I am this person, please allow me to set the record straight that there are some days I would prefer to push you into traffic than to even look at you. I'm not trying to be Mr. Sunshine over here. What I am trying to
Yeah,
be is as authentic as I can, and also be uh, aspirational in who I put out on my social media. Because there are days where I would love to just wad this up and feed it to somebody.
yeah,
And it's just, we have our moments. We've
yeah,
got days that we continue to be who we want to be. And then there are days of just who we flipping are. And sometimes those two people are very, very different. There are days I'm in combat boots and cargo pants and a tank top. And there are others where I'm buttoned up, bow tie with my glasses on. Cool. That's all the same person.
Yeah.
And I think that it's interesting the way that some people say, well, you're not being real. You're not being, authentic or sincere. I said, you are not being fair to the human condition, because there are
Mhm.
days where I'm ready to just scream into the void, and others where I'll hug you until the tears leak out of both of our eyes because I'm so overwhelmed by the wonderful of what this life is.
Mhm.
And we got to embrace the fact that we don't all occupy a spectrum that's this wide. We got to make sure that
Yeah.
that art continues to oscillate.
I agree with that. I think that's where the internet becomes a dangerous place
Yeah.
because you get to cure. I think, as I like to say, I like to think of my life as analog and digital. Like back in the analog life, we know and those
Yes.
who get it, back when we had an analog life. I think we just really have the luck on our side to have been born at a time where we know how to do both.
Yeah.
If the internet went down, we could go ride bikes, plant some seeds,
Yep.
cook a dinner and just listen to music and stare out of a window. We don't need this constant, stimulation. But we also fall victim to it. And I feel like we're pretty good at switching back and forth. And I feel bad for the generation that kind of does not know that there's a different way. That's just what they know. And so when you see the internet, they don't have that, like they didn't experience the Nigerian prince emails, right? Where we were like, is that's a little bit too good to be true.
Right.
So when we see things that are too good to be true, I think we have a little bit of discernment on our side to be like, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Whereas I think some of these younger kids, that's all they've seen, so they really believe it. They really think this person is that skinny or that rich, and all they do is live
Right.
in this beautiful house, and they just get to make content all day, and they don't have bad days. And
Yep.
while it's pretty to look at, we're the don't do this at home generation. We're the generation where we had to learn pretty quickly. Just because you see it like that on TV doesn't mean that's how it is on life and in life. And we grew up on that notion. And I think some of these kids sometimes don't they don't have the discernment, or they haven't had the life experience to say this isn't real. This is not
Yes.
true. So when they go and give that compliment, they're idolizing this person and thinking, oh, this person's so beautiful, and they have all this stuff, and they get all the best video games, and they get to do all this stuff, and they don't really realize that the person probably has to go to school just like you, and
Yep.
has to do the dishes just like you, has to
Yep.
wash their clothes just like you.
Right.
And that's where I feel like it's so important that if when people are on the internet, we have to really, it's where there's all this depression and stuff is coming from, because they're learning the hard way that this is not real.
Yes.
And when you set your standards to something that's not real, you have to reevaluate your standard and think, like, what was I leaning this against? What was I comparing it with? If that wasn't real,
Yeah.
I think that's what makes it hard. Yeah, it's hard for them to cope. But myself too, I think we fall victim to it too. But I
Oh
think we
gosh,
just
yeah.
have that skill set and that switch in our brain to be like, oh yeah, just like the Nigerian princess, this
Right.
isn't real.
Well, and there's that growing up period too, because, we make mention
Mhm.
of a lot of kids, thinking like literal children. We're talking,
Mhm.
because you've got two of your own, and they're coming into an age now where whenever you are much younger and living on your technology or through your technology, you don't know all the things. You don't know the
Mhm.
markers to throw up a red flag. You don't necessarily you might have the instinct, but you don't know exactly how to read it until you get just a little bit older. And
Yeah.
that's something I'm seeing in like the younger millennials and the elder Gen Z and Gen Alpha, that they're starting to be suspicious of literally everything.
Mhm.
Everything is too good to be true. Everything needs to be looked at with the side eye. Everything should be dissected and microscoped. And I'm thinking, wow, that's kind of a disheartening place to find yourself too.
Oh yeah.
I feel that a lot of our kids and young ones are starting to be disillusioned by life much, much earlier. Whereas
Mm.
I had amazing
Mhm.
parents growing up, and they were just always so protective and so careful to make sure that the wonder and whatever got to stay with me for as long as
Yeah.
humanly possible, until the whole thing came, into bleak and stark reality. For
Mhm.
what was bleak and stark. The other stuff, great. I don't want to make any kind of judgments on it. I think that a lot of kids, younger people growing into adulthood now, are told by the internet instead of their parents what's going on. And then there's sort of like a seed of distrust that's sort of sewn into things because they learn about things before their parents' timeline has really reached the point where they want to know about it. And it makes this unusual relationship strain between the youth and their parents or their authority figures or guardians, however we want to put it. I was like, ooh. And then that sows the seeds of discord, and it just continues to kind of snowball as they get older.
Yeah. I think also, I mean, to piggyback on that, I think that's also kind of like a first world problem too,
Oh,
right?
gosh, yeah.
Because
wow.
there's so many kids who get exposed to so many things that they just should, like horrific things they shouldn't be exposed to. And that, it makes you grow up. It does. It makes you lose that wonder of childhood quicker. And I think here in America, in a capitalistic society where we kind of live in this bubble, we're kind of doing it to ourselves. Like we have so much that the internet and so much information is actually doing what we're trying to protect the kids from, or trying to say, in our society here in this first world, we don't have to expose kids to poverty and all these things. They can live in this bubble, but then you give them this device that has all the information in the world, and they get to see the things that you were trying to protect them from in the first place.
Yes.
And I think, I mean, in some ways it's good. Some ways it makes these kids kind of grow up and see what's happening around the world. And it makes it harder for powers to be to hide information.
Yes.
But it does take that toll on them when they're not emotionally ready to face certain things and certain hardships about this life. It's kind of like you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. One minute they're watching toy reviews, the next minute they're clicking on something that's going on in the world, and you're like, gotta explain to your 5-year-old,
right,
or a 10-year-old, like what's what. And sometimes it's not your timeline, but I feel like that definitely helps them gain some kind of compassion for their peers, their generation, not just their first world generation, but their generation across the globe.
Yeah, their world generation. Because it terrifies me right now thinking that children are going through. I scroll through my Instagram, of course, like everybody else, and I'm going through it, and I keep seeing these videos, these reels. You and I have talked about, and some of the stuff that he's posting right now that's coming out of Israel is horrific. Luckily, they're hidden, but all you have to do is tap on that, and it will show you literally everything.
Yeah.
And it is terrifying to think that anyone under the age of whatever parents want their children to be looking at can just, by one more tap, they can see horrors this world is offering right now. And it breaks my heart, that it's happening. It is unbelievable in the year of our Lord 2023 that we are dealing with something that we should have gotten rid of in the 40s and never had to think about ever again.
Yeah.
And here we are again. And it's bad enough for those of us who learned about it in school who never got to see it firsthand unless they were related to it, maybe. And it is all happening again. And it is horrifying. It's I don't even, horror is the only word that I can think to describe it. I want to use more words, but it is just abject. And to think that there's somebody out there under the age of 18 that can literally double click on that. And the next thing you know, they are seeing the casualties of that conflict is terrifying. And how quickly, how do you mention that?
It is terrifying, but I feel I have this like horrible survivor's guilt about those situations, and that's not the only one happening right now. There's a lot of things happening all over the world, and as an immigrant, as a person that came from a third world, now second world developing country, I have that perspective too. There's so much guilt. There's so much guilt. When I think about my own country that hasn't been in a lot of conflict or anything like that, but just the conflict of poverty and being colonized. And I struggle with, should I show these things to my kids? Should I let them know? Because you get the privilege of deciding I don't want to look at it. And there are kids living it. And I really struggle with that. I struggle with how to talk to my kids. And I'm thinking, well, my first world self will be like, no, don't let them see that. And then, myself that would be living in some sort of similar situation, had circumstances not helped me, would be living it, and I wouldn't have a choice but to show it to them. So I struggle with that a lot. I struggle with the notion that they should be protected from it when people are living it. I think about, will this one video spark something in my children that will make them a change maker?
Yeah.
And if I don't show it to them, how's that going to happen? But then, as individuals, do I show it to them and then have them experience extreme trauma from having their bubble burst and seeing, what's going on around the world? So I don't know. I don't know how to deal with it. I can't personally deal with it. It's hard to watch. It's hard to look at, and it's hard to just receive information. And back, I'm sorry, how I feel about him. He's not my favorite person.
Right.
I feel like he centers other people's grief around himself.
Yeah.
And like to be this like center, a beacon of sharing information. Although, like you said, I have found his page to be very informative lately. I just have to kind of like ignore how I feel like he keeps bringing it back to himself. But I do see those images, and I do wonder how to explain that to my children. Like, why should my kids be exempt? Why should
Yeah.
they not have to see what's happening?
Yes.
And as a parent, I have a different answer every day. Ask me in an hour, and I'll have a different answer. I don't know how to do it.
That's wonderful, though. That's exactly what we talk about here all the time. It's always checking back in with yourself. Like right now, this moment, right here, right now, this is exactly how I feel about that. That's not locking into anything. What that's doing is saying, from the information that I have right now, from the emotion that I have right now, this is the best I can do with what I've been presented.
Mm-hmm.
And we're always looking to move forward. Like I can't make a decision today and expect that to be applicable in the next hour, in the next day, week, whatever our timeline may be. And another thing, you brought this up, and I think that's such a wonderful way to look at it. We may not love for the way that he presents it. What I do appreciate about him is the fact that he has given me information I didn't know before.
Yeah.
And now I can do my own homework and go to Bing and to Yahoo and to Google and to whatever and find more information on this. He was the spark, and now I will stoke the fire, and I will continue to add more to it that I consider to be more reputable sources, to be more neutral sources, to be more informative sources. Mm-hmm. He has a sensationalism, but without him, I would never have known. And so I'm going to give him his props, and then I'm going to go do the rest of it to make sure that what I feed myself is not sensational. It's more informational. And then that way I can get a better handle on what's going on in the world, because I'm still trying to figure out how to feel about Israel and the U.S.'s involvement in all that's going on over there, as well as Ukraine and Russia. And that's just a couple of the big ones that actually make it to the news. TikTok, I think, is huge in helping us realize that there is so much more going on in our world than what we see on the news channels.
Yeah.
And they can holler about it all day. They can try to legislate it away. And I'm just like, friends, I hate to tell you this. We are going to literally shout down the Capitol if you try to do that, because to me, this is one of the best starting points we've had in years.
Yeah.
And that algorithm is probably one of the most telling that we've ever had, because it will serve you up stuff. It makes it worse than rock candy. Like something I cannot put down. They know what I want to see, and they serve it up.
It's hard because there's a lot of actual just information out there.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that there are people who are so desperate to be validated, to be seen, to be important, that they will take this real, true, pure information and wrap it up in a way where your validation and acceptance of that information is the same validation and acceptance of them. And that, and not just, I'm not like bashing him or anything. A lot of people, he does spread a lot of real and good information. I think I have an ability to see how he wraps himself up in that. And that's where I personally am like, okay, let me just get the information. But a lot of people don't have that.
Yes.
That discernment to be like, okay, just because they're doing good on this thing or on the right side of something doesn't mean that this person is a reputable source.
Yeah.
Like in this particular thing, he's a good source, got the information, and not just him, but you have to be able to unwrap the person from the present, because sometimes people they're real goal is to wrap themselves up in that thing so that you can accept them.
Mhm.
And I think a real gift giver separates themselves from the gift on purpose so
Ooh.
that you can really truly appreciate the gift for what it is. And so you have to watch those people. You have to kind of have that discernment to be like, are they wrapping themselves up with this present, or are they actually just giving me this gift of information? And that's where I think it can get a little dangerous. And that I love TikTok for that, but I also hate TikTok for that because there are people like the real true feelings of validation come with how many followers, how many people like me, how many people. So they'll pick things that are part of the human circumstance. Like we have to see
Mhm.
what's going on over there. We have this is not just a guy who makes model trains. Somebody can
Right.
say that's not for me. I don't want to watch it. Like this is the world. This is our literal like what's happening, what we're experiencing, what we're living. And so I think when people wrap themselves up in that, they're it's you have to watch out because I think there's so many people follow those people thinking they're good people, they're giving us good information, and then they're not though. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, and then you
Ooh.
think you're on the right side of something, and because you keep backing that person when they're not on the right side of something, you find yourself on the wrong side as well.
Yep.
So that's a little tricky, and that's why I say that kind of disclaimer when it comes to that particular internet personality
I
because
agree.
I think there are a lot of people who want to do the right thing, who are just recognizing their privilege, who are just waking up and kind of seeing all the things they never had to look at before, and they want to follow these people. They want to say, "Hey, I'm trying to do the right thing. I'm trying to learn from somebody who's trying to show me where my privilege lies." And so they pick these people, and then it's like, that wasn't a good choice. So
Yeah. Oh
that's
my gosh.
silence myself.
So yes, and just so many little pickety
Sorry.
points, and it's like, no, 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 it's
I could go
great.
forever.
I mean, not that it needs me to come back in here and highlight any of it. I'm like, yes, yes, and yes, and yes, and yes, because
Yeah.
I keep seeing these things in here. I follow. I don't know her name. I know that she wears these great tortoise rim glasses, and she's usually giving people information about wealth management and investing in this, that, and the other. And she says, I've been in a lot of rooms with a lot of celebrities. And she says, the thing that most people don't understand is that a lot of celebrities are very well curated, very unintelligent people.
Mm,
Not to cast any aspersions. That's not my goal in the least. It's just one of those things that you want to do is very critically, as best as you can, look at what people are trying to tell you, what they're trying to feed you, what they're putting up on the plate.
mm-hmm,
And that is your starting point. That's your appetizer. What
mm-hmm.
you put that on a small plate over to the left. Take a bite of that, and then you decide whether or not that's something that you like at all. And then kind of like check out the buffet. Go look, go do your own
Yeah,
shopping. And then that way you can find something from more credible sources, more reputable sources that are more what you were saying, more in tune instead of trying to wrap up the clout. What they're trying to do is disseminate the information.
mm-hmm. Yeah,
And on social media, it's such a precarious balance that you have to strike because if you don't keep the attention of the people watching, you don't get your message to as many people.
right. And you don't get the money that you
And you
might
don't get the
be
money.
getting with that. Yeah.
Exactly. And I work in social media in Las Vegas, and that's exactly what it is. It's always something exactly like that. You need to make sure that you are sensational enough to keep people watching. You also need to strike the balance so that you are putting out sincere, true information as best as you know what to put out there. And how do I package it in such a way where it's still sensational to keep people's attention, and yet it is still close enough to the actual capital T truth that
Yeah.
people are being informed responsibly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's
And
tough.
there's a lot of people who don't balance that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I feel like I have this, and this is one of the reasons you and I became such good friends because when we first met, we realized how completely different we were, and how completely the circumstances in our life stories were so polar opposite, and yet here we were kikiing in the corner. Here we were being like, "Oh my god, I love that too!"
Yeah.
And I think it was just an eye opener for both of us to say, "Hey, listen." As people will sell you that people who come in the same package are your people, and sometimes we just had to
Wow.
learn by fire that those are not your people. And I think that when people put themselves in certain packages to sell, that's what people buy. And you have to really unwrap it. You have to really see what that person is on the inside, and if their values, and if, what they think and how they move really aligns with what you think and how you move. But you have to know that about yourself before you can make that decision.
Ooh,
You have to know what you stand for before you can decide, I stand with this person.
yo.
And so that's what I'm trying to get people to understand when they're looking at these internet people and they want to do the right thing. Just because someone seems like they're on the right side of something, they're literally using that as fodder to say, hey, look how important I am. And you really got to spend the time to unwrap and figure out who people are. But first and foremost, you got to figure out who you are, so you could know if that person aligns with what. And that's how, and so I'm bringing it back to, he's a very popular person, and a lot of people align with him because he just, from base value, is doing the right thing. He's trying to make things right. He's trying to, show people things that are wrong. But I think if you look really closely, that all is true. But if you look really closely, you can see ways in which he's making it about himself. And to me, that diminishes his message a little bit. And he's
Yes.
not the only one. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Oh my God. Wow. Yeah. Know thyself.
Know thyself, really.
And be confident in who that person is, so you can look around in people in different packaging. That's so, yes. Oh my gosh.
Know thyself. It's tough. It's tough to do because it hurts. It hurts to look at yourself and be like, you know what? I was the problem in that situation. It hurts to do that, but it also hurts to say, hey, I really was not the problem. And yet, because of my packaging, because of who I look, what I look like, where I come from, how I speak, people have decided that I don't deserve the things that I deserve. And both sides of that can be very painful.
Yes.
But I think if you just kind of stand in what you know and who you really are, you'll come out on top. But it's a painful journey. A lot of stones to step on, a lot of rocks.
Amen. Oh my gosh, because that's the thing too. Like what you're describing is also painful. And before we get to the pain, there's that discomfort. There's that wild discomfort of putting yourself in the position of trying to find out more about yourself, trying to learn from people who don't look like you, have the same background as you, come from the same socioeconomic background as you, and realize that your education is lacking and they are the ones who hold the puzzle pieces to make that more complete. That is a wild realization to come to. A. B, the pain of actually going through that. One of those beautiful metaphors that I love, it's like if people didn't know any better, if they were watching a seed grow, from the outside it looks like destruction. But you can't grow without busting through that little shell, without, experiencing the growth, breaking through the soil and becoming what you were always meant to be, because you took the water, because you were growing in the sunlight of recognition and so many of these things. And it just came to like, oh, right. Because a life of comfort is delicious to live in. However, it's never the one that provides the most growth.
Yeah, correct. And you can't learn. What did someone say to me? You can't learn what you already think you know.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
You can't. It's impossible.
Yeah.
And I think the thing is that when you come in certain packaging, a lot of times you get to live a life where you don't have to think about it.
Yeah.
You don't have to think about it. And I feel like one of my biggest obstacles in life is that, like, I'm a Black woman immigrant. Like, there's so many ways if you cube that, a Black woman, a Black immigrant, an immigrant woman, a woman, like if you cube that, I feel like I'm always in a position where I have to be hyper aware of who I am, what I am, not because of myself, that people are making me hyper aware of who I am and how I have to act to kind of fit into what they already believe I am. And on the flip side of that, I think the big thing that you and I connected on, you're this white Southern blonde boy just whistling to yourself, walking down the street. The society does not make you do that. They don't make you do that. And I think you made yourself do that. You did that. You walked into New York City and saw all these different people and kind of like, wait a minute here. And I think that's the difference. But either way, I feel like I was forced, like you did it on your own fruition, and yet we come to this place where we can kind of like figure yourself out and be like, wait a minute, let me analyze what's happening around me, and how I can put my foot down and stop the ride. Or
Yeah.
I can say, you know what, I should be on this ride. I should be here to show people what to do. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's an interesting
Well, and we've
thought.
had so much of these things. No, thank you. That is so incredibly kind of you to say. That's so, so nice. B, yeah, because you get raised a certain way because it's not that I'm holding anybody at fault for any of it. It's just they taught me
Hmm.
what they knew, and
Hmm.
that's fine. You get to a new place where there's a lot more new information to assimilate and to sort of integrate into the person that you are and the person that you want to be. And so you got to let go of some of those things just because I just don't have that much memory in the old processor. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? And
Hmm.
also, those things that you learned before will block some of the new information from getting into the system.
Yeah.
So you just got to let it go. I'll never, one of our colleagues that we work with, Jen, she asked me very point blank because I was turning a corner and I would put it on my social media and it'd be a conversation that I put out to the world. And she wrote me, she says, do you still have that Confederate flag phone case? And I was like, I am so sorry. I said, I don't remember ever having a Confederate phone case. I said, please understand, I 100%
Mm.
believe it. If you remember it, I promise you, I'm not denying it. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that now I'm a different human being
Hmm.
and I know more and I know better. And I appreciate you asking and let me be the first to tell you, I do not have that any longer. I said, and
Hmm.
my opinions on those topics have changed greatly since you and I were colleagues. And moving forward, thank you for reminding me. And yes, that is
Yeah.
no longer a part of my personality, who I am, who I want to be, what I put out in the world, and what I believe to be the human being that I am.
Yeah.
So the answer is no, I don't.
I remember you and I having so many of these conversations, and I never
So
had the
many.
expectation of you to change your mind or to do different. I think we just would have the conversation where a lot of times between the both of us, we just hadn't thought of certain things. We just hadn't been in the situation where it's like, oh, I have to think about this because when you
Right.
come from a certain place, you don't have to think about it when you're
No.
in this bubble where nobody has to think about it. And then I think New York City just, woo, you get there and you see so many people that are against what you or your parents or your family, your community tells you, and then you meet someone and you're like, this person's awesome. This
Right.
person's amazing. This drag queen is like my best friend.
Yeah.
People are like, and you come from a place where people are like, no, that's so wrong. And you're like, person's amazing. They
Yes.
picked me up at 2 o'clock in the morning when I was throwing up on the side of the road behind a trash can. And then you have to like, you can't move on. You have to stop and be like, wait a minute.
You must.
All the things I thought were true. Hold on a second.
Right.
Um, and I think you out of probably are one of, if not the person that I've had the most those those experiences with. Like
Thank you.
you and I have been like, hold on, we've had these mind blown. Like, let's talk about this. Let's break this
Right.
down
Well, so
because
just think about how much easier it is to like take the information that we're given. Like
yeah.
taking your example of the drag queen who took you home at 2, found you vomiting behind a bush. You're like, oh, okay. Everything I was taught about you has literally been turned on its head
Hmm.
within an hour. Now
Hmm.
I can either do the work and say like, well, they're the exception, not the rule.
Right.
Or I can look at this very objectively like, maybe I should leave this open to more interpretation and more research.
Hmm.
And that's whenever you start to realize that is so much easier. If you just open,
Hmm.
I'm not saying drop it. What I'm saying is being open to more information.
Yeah.
Because like there's a lot of good stuff that I got from growing up in Alabama, tons of it, and it still needs
Hmm.
tweaking. It's incomplete information. I had a conversation with some friends of mine. We're all sitting around the kitchen table, piercings, tattoos, craziness, all this kind of stuff, goth wear, dyed hair, yada, yada, yada. And I was like, from the last 37 minutes of conversation that we've had around this dinner table, I said, I am more comfortable telling you my entire life story than I would be that person who's wearing khakis and a pink polo that I was taught to trust with my life and my money.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I can either think that you are the exception, even though there's more than one of you, or I can start to be a little bit more open to what's coming down the pike at me. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
God. Carrie, our producer here, put something in those. She says, you can't know how great something is until you take it out of the box.
Yeah.
The packaging is just the most superficial layer of this entire onion of awesome that literally every person we can encounter can turn out to be. If we just take a minute to figure out who they are beneath whatever it is they want to put out for the world to look at.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I love those conversations.
Well, there's this conversation that kind of leads back to that about, just our parents and what we were taught. And there's this big influx of videos and content of the idea of, like, number one, recognizing that, what your parents taught you isn't necessarily true and isn't necessarily true for 2023. It might have been true in 1983. But I'm grappling as a parent and as a daughter with this idea of, like, people being really upset with their parents and cutting their parents off and saying, that, like, boundaries, deciding, hey, listen, parents, this is what you taught me, but this is not how I'm living my life anymore. And kind of looking back at them and saying, thank you for most of the good things. If you consider yourself a good parent, a good person, your parents had something to do with that.
Yeah.
So there's a thank you there, but then there's also, like, hey, I don't do that anymore. I don't think that way anymore. And then the boundary of how you're going to deal with people, including your parents, including your loved ones that still do.
Yeah.
And I'm grappling with that because I see a lot of people cutting their parents off, saying no more. I don't, I can't be around them anymore, or just kind of any type of in between of, like, yeah, I go home for the holidays, I stomach it for 2 days, and then I'm on the first thing smoking out of there. But as a parent who's raising children whose ideologies are so different, I stress about that a lot. I talk to my kids about it a lot. Like, please don't cut me off because I'm making you do chores. In 20 years, it's like, yes, you made me do slave labor. Like, who knows what the idea behind that is going to be in 20 years? People can say, oh, this was the wrong thing. You shouldn't have done that. And I'm trying to encourage open conversation with them to say, hey, listen, I'm not going to get it right. Don't expect it from get-go. I'm not going to get everything right. I'm one person and I'm choosing some things and I don't know if I'm choosing them right, but let's work on this together. And I'm struggling with the relationships with family members and people, from my analog life or from the life I lived before. And I love them and I like them, but when your ideologies don't match, how do you fix that? And at the same time, I'm trying to be a dam for my children.
Yes.
All this stuff is hitting me and all this dirt in the water is hitting me and I'm holding it. I'm trying not to let it get through to them, but some of it's still getting through. And how do I reconcile with them in 20 years when they're trying to be a dam for their children? How are they going to look back and say, hey, you let all this trash get through? I can't sleep at night thinking about it sometimes. Like, it's just such a weird conundrum to be in. I feel like this is what they mean when they say you're a generational curse breaker, when you're kind of like in this predicament, because I'm trying my best and I think my parents tried their best, but I feel like in some ways I have a right to be angry with them. And I'm like terrified that my kids are going to feel the same way. And I have no idea how to navigate that.
Well, it sounds like you're making great steps as far as, like, setting the foundation for it. Look, these are my fears. This is what I'm concerned about. I never had that conversation with my parents. Like, we touched on it.
I haven't either. Don't make a mistake. This is the conversation I have with my children.
Oh, I understand that.
Conversation.
No. From the conversations you had about you and your parents, they sound like amazing people. And there was also a very strict divide between parent and child. The older we get, the more that boundary sort of blurs because we want to be friends with them. We want to be peers because as we get older, we start to realize they're just people.
Yeah.
That, they're the people who were tasked with bringing us up and making sure that we became good people, functioning members of society, this, that, and the other. But just like everyone else, they have their fallacies, their foibles, whatever we want to call it. And it's just like, okay, do we forgive it? Do we move forward to it? How do we discuss it? The fact that you're bringing it up now before your children even leave the house is one of those things. This is my concern. I promise you, I'm doing my very best. We need to keep these channels of conversation open so that it doesn't get to that point.
Yeah.
This is not something I talk about very often. I don't have as much clear conversation with my parents as I once did. Like it's been a couple of years since we had a really strong relationship. It's one of those things where politics and beliefs and these kind of things really, really, really made an obstruction in our relationship. And I mourn it and I miss it. It's also one of those things where I understand that this is something that the door is always open if they want to come back to me. It's gotten to a point now where I don't know if it was me cutting them off or them cutting us off because it's been so long. They have an engraved invitation to come back anytime they want. All they have to do is knock. I said, I feel as though I've reached out to you as many times as I can without feeling as though I am surrendering something that doesn't need to be surrendered. It feels like a respect boundary like struggle. I am always, always, always open to us reconciling. You will have to knock.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult. I don't like talking about it. I feel as though I'm trying to be respectful to whatever relationship boundary they've put in place, if any. And so I'm just like, hey, the fact that you are setting it up now, something that I never got when I was younger, leaves that open that if you do get into a struggle similar to that later, that channel of communication will be open to you and your kids so you don't have to worry about it as much.
Yeah, I am in the same predicament with my parents, and it's not it wasn't just a black and white switch on. It was a weird, slow, what's the word I'm looking for? Like an evolution.
Yes, a progression.
A progression. I don't know how to talk about it. I don't even know what to call it. But there's something unspoken and there's something missing. And mourning is a good word because it's something that I don't know how to fix it, but we haven't even said there's something to be fixed in order to fix it. And I think that's what a lot of people in our generation are going through is that we somehow came through with the ability to change and shift and move with the times. And I think it was harder for our parents or grandparents. Who knows why? We weren't there back then, but who knows why? And I think it's a struggle. It's something for sure. I have a lot of friends going through. I think with the climate in the past 10, 15 years, so much politics, so much different thought, so much acceptance.
Media.
It's been a lot. I feel specifically on our generation, on Gen X. I think they call us the forgotten generation or whatever. No one thinks about us. No one talks about us.
You know,
but I think we have this really uncanny ability to kind of like adapt to everything. And I don't think it came out of all positivity. I think it came out of some trauma and came out of some neglect. But we have this ability, and I think we're just trying to connect with everybody. And I think it's so, so, so difficult, and it's taking a toll on us that we're not even noticing because we're so used to not really thinking about ourselves.
Yeah.
Like, right? We're just so used to kind of like, it needs to be done, just do it. If I break my arm, oh well.
Right.
And that's one thing I look up to the millennials and the Gen Zs and the alphas with so much respect for, because they will pause and be like, my arm is broken, I'm not doing this anymore.
Okay. Thank you.
And we're the ones that are like, oh, we're still gonna keep going.
Right.
They will be like, oh no, I am uncomfortable. We are not doing this.
100%.
And I look, it's just so many generations coming so fast, and we're trying so hard to adapt. And I am struggling. Yeah. I'm struggling to adapt, but my motivation to adapt is still there, still going strong.
Oh, 100%.
But it's not easy. It's not, my best friend said to me, she goes, you know what's weird? Our childhood is more like our grandparents' childhood than it is like our children's childhood.
Yes.
And I was like, oh my God, you're right.
Wow.
So it's so hard to juggle these, as the middle-aged people on earth, to juggle these relationships with your grandparents, with your parents, with your kids. Some of us have grandkids. It's like we're just caught in the middle, dude, and we're just trying to make everybody happy, and it just feels impossible sometimes. But
Right.
what are you gonna do?
Oh, and also I keep thinking, like, I feel young. Like, I feel young. I feel great. Like, I don't have as many wrinkles as I think I should. I look younger than I am. No, 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 no. What I need to realize is that everyone else, every one of us is getting older, meaning they are becoming adults with opinions and lives of their own and this, that, and the other. Whenever, I get frustrated with my parents because I'm like, I'm a grown man. Like, I've been paying taxes for years. I've been out of the house for decades. Like, there are a million things that I think I'm entitled to because I'm an adult, and I will always be their baby boy. Who doesn't necessarily, who should always like line up with our beliefs and our structures and our systems and this, that, and the other. It's like, and I've also been to a lot of places and seen the way a lot of other people do it. And there's something to be learned and taken away from that is better. It's more efficient. It takes less energy. It takes less time. And I prefer to do that instead. And that is not enjoyable for people on either side, whether it's older or younger, because there are younger generations coming up like, oh, you're doing it way, way harder than it needs to be. And they're like, beep, beep, boop, and done. I was like, okay, I got something to learn from them as well. And I have to continue to adjust my perspective so that I can take as much knowledge and good from literally both sides of me to make sure that, one, I remain respectful and still both of my chronological superiors while setting healthy boundaries. Right. And still acknowledging the fact that these people coming up behind us, whether they are in their teens or in their 20s or even 30s, still have a lot to offer as well. They're not children. These are people who have a lot to offer. We just need to be more ready to listen because sometimes their format doesn't necessarily line up with the way that I like to learn. Well, that's on me. That's not on them. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the part that I think our parents are stuck on, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I think for our generation, I think boundaries is kind of a new thing for us. And, but yes and no, because we are the MTV generation. We are the ones that said, no, we're keeping our Converse. We are the ones that said, no, we're going to keep our video games.
Yep.
We are the ones that kind of like really made a point to do it differently than our parents. And we did it with no structure, no thought. We just were like, yeah, let's just do it.
We're doing it.
So I think there's something to be said for that, but I just feel like we're kind of stuck and we've never thought about boundaries. That's something I think we're learning from the millennials is to say, hey, wait a minute. No, I want to protect me. Yeah. And that's such a new concept. And I think in doing all this and kind of, being the one to have to take care of your grandmother and having to like listen to her saying things, you're like, okay, Big Mama, you're not supposed to say that, but like, how are you gonna fight with Big Mama at 95 years old, trying to get her to change her perspective, or are you just gonna feed her food and keep it moving? Exactly. We kind of have to like make these decisions and like same thing. Am I gonna go home at Thanksgiving and fight with my parents or great uncle, or am I gonna, we have to kind of. There's just so much mental load on navigating it all. And in the middle of it, trying to learn how to put boundaries, set forth boundaries to protect ourselves. It just, to me, it compounds it, makes it so much harder. And I do think it's something specific to our generation being kind of like in that middle point right now, where there's a generation or two older than us and a generation or two younger than us. And we're trying to just be able to deal with everybody. And I think we're the last generation that cares. Like, I don't think, I don't think all of us care if their grandparents like them or they get them. They're just like, we're going to do what we want. I think we're the last ones that care. And I wonder if we should if that's something we should be letting go. We're kind of learning this self-care and juggling that and trying to deal with everybody else. I think is just specifically hard for us, for sure.
Agree. The bottom line is, use your words, friends. Thank you for joining us again in this moment of radical joy. If this is your first time, we're so happy you're here. Take a moment to check out our archive. See if there's something else that fires you up, rekindles the joy in you. And hey, spread the word if you enjoyed it. We welcome reviews and messages. Let me know what you want to talk about. I rarely run out of things to say. So if there's something on your mind or heart, I want to hear from you. Don't forget, there is no shame in joy. I am not a therapist or a medical professional. If you're experiencing a mental health emergency, please call 911. This content and other content produced by CLW Studios and affiliated partners is not therapy, and nothing in this content indicates a therapeutic relationship. Any opinions of guests on this podcast are their own and do not represent the opinions of James or CLW Studios. Please consult with your therapist or seek one in your area if you're experiencing mental health symptoms. Anything in this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Learn more about James and CLW Studios. Follow the link in the show notes. Don't forget to leave a review, and hey, we'll send you a sticker. Just send a screenshot and let us know where you want it sent. Have a great week, and we will see you next Wednesday for another dose of radical joy. Love y'all.